The RODE PodMic USB is confusing for a lot of people. When the first PodMic came out, it was kind of the go-to for a lot of people. Do you want to start a podcast with multiple hosts? Well, you could get 4 SM7Bs and put down $2,000 for an audio setup, or you could buy 4 PodMics for the price of 1 SM7B. Yeah, I'd probably take the PodMics, thank you very much. But the PodMic USB was different. At double the price of the original, it was kind of off-putting for a lot of people. I mean, why was RODE pricing something like this so high when you could buy something like the Maono PD400X for arguably less money? I mean, it's true, the PodMic USB is far from the cheapest USB microphone out there, and it probably won't be winning any awards for value, but when you factor in everything it has to offer, it's actually not quite as expensive as you might think. And in fact, a setup with PodMic USBs might actually be cheaper than a setup with regular PodMics. But before we discuss why, we first need to talk about the microphone itself and what it has to offer, because that's going to be really important for our discussion. So let's just jump right into it. At first glance, yeah, it's a microphone and it comes with microphone things. But honestly, the PodMic USB is probably the nicest surprise I've ever gotten from a microphone unboxing, and I've had a few of them. The USB-C cable, which is USB-C on both ends by the way, is around 10 feet long and is actually nicer than most charging cables I've used. This right here is how you make a microphone cable. The pop filter is also a really nice addition. Usually if a microphone includes any kind of a filter, it's just kind of one of those cheap foam filters you can get off Amazon for like $4. This one is actually custom made for the PodMic, and not only does it keep the aesthetic, I actually think it looks better with the filter. The fact that RODE actually put some thought into the accessories just really elevates the whole experience for me. It's not like just threw in a couple of cheap off-brand things in the box and called it a day. They actually designed it to feel premium all the way through. Even the microphone itself feels really nice. It's heavy, so you need a good boom arm or a desk stand to hold it up, but it's pretty compact if not a bit stout, and it's made entirely out of metal, except for these little knobs on the side. Seriously, this thing is dense. The yoke it comes on is also really flexible, so you can position it however you need to. All the controls are on the back, which does help spruce up the look, but at the same time, they're also kind of a bit hard to see or get to. That being said, you get the USB port, an XLR port, an LED, a headphone jack, and a headphone volume wheel that, surprisingly enough, also doubles as a mute button. The wheel actually feels really nice. The press has a soft click to it, and the wheel itself is notched, so turning it kind of feels like turning a mouse wheel, which is something I've definitely never tried on any other mics, and as a whole, it feels surprisingly nice to use. But of course, this by itself doesn't make it a better value than the original PodMic. There's still one more aspect we need to talk about, and it's by far the most important one. This microphone is completely controlled by software. Sound, processing, gain, everything. I mean, software is central to the experience. I mean, it sounds fine on its own, but if you really want to bring it to life, you gotta do the processing. When you download the RODE Central software, you get things like EQ settings, a noise gate, compression, high-pass filter, pretty much everything that you get from something like the Rodecaster Pro 2. And thankfully, there is an internal DSP, so all the settings from the software are saved right onto the microphone itself. Plus, you can actually plug this thing directly to your phone and use their own recording app to change some of the settings. Pretty cool. Also real quick, the built-in preamps in this microphone are spectacular. It's the same preamps that are used in the Rodecaster Pro 2, and honestly, this is the first USB microphone I've ever used that has almost no hiss and no buzzing whatsoever. But that's actually not everything. RODE also has software that lets you plug in up to 4 of these things at once. Usually computers only accept one input device, but RODE software can actually make that happen. It's kind of like having a digital audio interface like a Rodecaster Pro 2 built right into it. I'm pretty sure you heard a common theme with all this. From what RODE has going on here, it kind of seems like their goal is to give you the quality and features of an XLR microphone with the convenience of USB. You get pretty much everything you get from the Rodecaster Pro 2 or the RODE Duocaster built right into your microphone. The processing, the multiple inputs, even the preamps. All you really need is your computer. The original PodMics were kind of meant to be used with interfaces like this, so it seems like the RODE is kind of trying to modernize the setup for the average content creator. I mean, why add a bunch of complex hardware and steps to your system when you really don't need it? Which leads me back to the question I posed at the beginning of the video. How is a PodMic USB setup cheaper than a regular PodMic setup when it starts at double the price? Well, it comes down to this. Let's start this off by painting a few scenarios, and for this comparison, I'm going to assume that you'll be using PodMics with a RODE interface because that's really the most one-to-one analogy with what the PodMic USB has to offer. So let's say you want to start a 4-person podcast. If you chose to take this route with the PodMic, you need to invest in 4 PodMics, 4 pop filters, 4 desk stands, 4 XLR cables, and a Rodecaster Pro 2. If you went with PodMic USBs, you'd need 4 PodMic USBs, 4 desk stands, and that's it. If we tallied up the costs, the PodMic setup would probably cost somewhere in the ballpark of around $1,200. If you went with the PodMic USB setup, you'd probably only spend around $900. Right off the bat, that's a $300 savings. Okay, but I don't really want that many hosts. I just want to start a little 2-person podcast. If that's the case, then you'd either need 2 PodMics, 2 pop filters, 2 desk stands, 2 XLR cables, and a Rodecaster Duo, or 2 PodMic USBs and 2 desk stands. That'd probably tally up to about $800 to $900 for the PodMics and about $400 to $450 for the PodMic USBs. Literally, the USB setup is cheaper than the XLR interface by itself. Okay, but I just want to do a show with myself. I'm the only host, so I only really need 1 microphone. Well, then you get yourself 1 PodMic, 1 pop filter, 1 desk stand, 1 XLR cable, and a Rode Streamer X for over $500, or 1 PodMic USB and 1 desk stand for just over $200. You get the idea. Now, I understand that most people who invest in something like a PodMic might not really be investing in an expensive interface like what Rode offers right off the bat. And it's true, getting a cheaper interface would make any of these setups cheaper than a PodMic USB setup. My point is that in my opinion, the PodMic USB is kind of doing for interfaces what the PodMic did for podcast microphones, making them more approachable and accessible. I'm not saying the software is perfect. I mean, most of the reviewers will definitely point that out, but it does make something like a Rodecaster Pro feel a bit more accessible to smaller content creators who don't really want to deal with interfaces or their insane price tags. And in the process, you get something that just feels a bit easier to use for people who don't really know anything about audio or how to set up a big fancy setup. Cost savings aside, you can still upgrade to XLR if you ever want to, and in the process, you'd get a microphone that arguably sounds better than the original version. And that to me is why the PodMic USB is ultimately the better value. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. I really appreciate you. And if you want to help support the channel, it would really make my day if you hit the subscribe button. This channel is still growing, and I'd love it if you joined along for the ride. Also, let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this video, or hey, if you didn't enjoy it. Any feedback you leave me is thoroughly appreciated. In the meantime, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Adios.